Hey guys, I'm Austin from Gun Plumber. Before I get started with any classes on maintenance or repairs of any weapons, I wanted to walk you guys through a quick class on the cycle of operations. The cycle of operations is essentially broke down into 8 steps. Just keep in mind when we're talking about these steps that more than one step may be happening at the same time. The 8 steps in the cycle of operation are feeding, chambering, locking, firing, unlocking, extraction, ejection, and cocking. Now just keep in mind that you can actually start this process at any point. Depending on what armor's manual you're looking at, whether it be for a Cole M4 or a Barrett or a Smith & Wesson M&P, some of these armor's manuals may start with feeding, some may start with firing. It really just depends, and it kind of varies throughout the field on where this process actually starts at. Okay, we're going to talk about feeding for just a second. Feeding's pretty self-explanatory. To me, it's really good to know during the cycle of operations when a step begins and when a step ends. Well, now for feeding, basically feeding starts once the bowl is coming forward and makes contact with that round. Feeding is over once that round is completely free of the magazine feed lips. Now I just want you to take note that if you think you have a feeding problem, sometimes it's often confused with something they call short stroking. Basically you fired a round and the bolt's coming back, but it doesn't actually come back far enough past that next round to catch it. So basically you're going to have extraction, ejection, and your bolt's going to be closed on an empty chamber. Now if that is not the problem, the bolt actually does travel back far enough to catch the next round, then you have a feeding problem. And often feeding problems are caused by the magazine malfunction. So switch out your magazine if you have a feeding problem and see if that helps. Okay, now we're going to talk about chambering. We just talked about feeding, and feeding ends when that round is stripped from the magazine lips. Once that is over, chambering begins. Well, that bolt's going to continue to push that round up into the chamber. The extractor is going to snap over the rim of the brass round, and the ejector is going to be compressed. Chambering is officially over once the round can go no farther into the chamber. Now, if you have a problem with chambering, there's a few things you can check. First, you want to check your barrel and your barrel extension. Just make sure there's no debris or anything blocking the area, and make sure there's no visible damage. The next thing you want to do, you want to check your cartridge. Take that out and make sure it's not bent, broken, or any visible damage. The next thing you want to check, look at your bolt face and make sure there's no visible damage on that, and make sure everything looks as it should. The last thing you want to check is your buffer. Look at your buffer and see if your spring is weak, bent, broken, and hopefully one of those things will fix your problem. If not, there could be other causes, and at that point just send me an email and I'll try to help you out. Okay, now, from the end of chambering, basically that bolt carrier is going to continue to move forward on your traditional AR-15, M4, M16 type weapons. As that bolt carrier moves forward, your locking lugs are going to rotate 20 degrees and lock into your barrel extension, and that's when locking is complete. Okay, so now that you know what locking is, if you have a failure to lock, a couple things you can check. Check your carrier key and your gas tube, see if there's any damage on those. You'll see little nicks in it if they're not lined up and they're hitting the wrong way. Another thing you can check is your extractor. If it's protruding out too far, or in your ejector, check those. One thing to keep in mind, if you have a failure to lock, you're also going to have a failure to fire, because the weapon cannot fire if it is not locked. So just be cautious when you're ejecting that last round that is definitely an unfired round. Okay, so the next step in the cycle of operation is going to be firing. Now, assuming your AR-15, M16A2 style weapon is cocked, you're going to take your selection lever and put it on semi, and you're going to pull the trigger. When you pull the trigger, that hammer is going to fall and it's going to hit your firing pin, which is ultimately going to fire your round. And that's where firing ends. Okay, now if you have a firing problem, let's say you're out the range and you have a live round in, you put your selector lever on semi and you pull the trigger. You hear the hammer fall, but it doesn't go off. What do? Well, the first thing you want to do is just wait. You're going to wait 30 seconds with that weapon pointed in a safe direction before you do anything. Now after 30 seconds or a minute, the next thing you can do is you can take that round out and you want to look at it. Now if it has a nice deep mark where the firing pin hit it, well then it's bad ammo and you don't really have anything to worry about. I probably wouldn't use that ammo anymore, but it's not a weapon issue. Now if you take that round out and it has a very light mark on it, there could be at least two causes. I'm sure there are more, but the two main problems that come to my mind initially is either a firing pin that is slightly too short or your hammer spring is too weak. Okay, so now that you know what firing is, we're going to talk about unlocking, which is the next step in the cycle of operation. So you've just fired your weapon and the bullet goes down the barrel. Well, gas pressure goes down through there and it goes through a hole and up into the gas tube and back down into the carrier key. And the gas pressure when it hits the carrier key is what's going to make your bolt initially go to the rear. Once your bolt initially starts going to the rear, your locking lugs are going to rotate back that 20 degrees and unlock from the weapon. And that's where unlocking ends. Now if you have an unlocking issue, the first thing you want to do is you want to lock that bolt to the rear and take that round that's in the chamber out and check for obstructions. You want to look and make sure there's nothing down in there. But there are several other problems it could be. If you have, if your locking lug or your barrel extension has any damage, it could cause that. But the most common problem that I have seen, it's usually a gas issue. Either your carrier key could be loose or too much carbon buildup in your gas tube. There are several issues that this could be, and it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, from what I've seen, it's usually a gas problem. The next step in the cycle of operation is going to be extraction. Extraction is pretty simple. Your extractor is clipped over the round that's currently in the chamber, and as your bolt comes to the rear, it's going to pull that round out of the chamber with it. And once it clears the chamber, extraction has occurred. Now if you have a problem, if you have an extraction failure, the most common problem is just going to be your extractor. I would change that out. Okay, the next step in the cycle of operation we're going to talk about is going to be ejection. Extraction just occurred, so the round that we just fired has already cleared the chamber. Well, the bolt and bolt carrier is going to continue to move to the rear, and you have a spring-loaded ejector that is on the left side of that round. Basically, once the round gets out to the ejection port, it's going to flip it out of that ejection port, and ejection has occurred. Now, if you have a problem with ejection and it's not ejecting properly, the first thing you want to check is your ejector. Now, the last step in the cycle of operation we're going to talk about is cocking. Ejection has just occurred, and that bolt and bolt carrier is going to continue moving to the rear. It's going to compress the recoil spring and cock the hammer, and cocking has occurred. And that's our last step in the cycle of operation. It's basically going to start over, and it's a continuous cycle. Now that we've talked about the cycle of operation, I really hope this video helped. If you'd like a more in-depth version of this class, you may want to look at purchasing my armor's manual. It's an AR-15 style armor's manual. It's on my website. It does incorporate all the fully automatic stuff, but most of you will not have that. That's basically for military and law enforcement. Again, I'd like to thank you guys for watching this cycle of operation video made by Gun Plumber. There will be a lot more videos coming up, and if you'd like to request any videos, you can email us at gunplumber15@gmail.com, or you can go to our website, request information there, and we also have a forum. Thanks again. This is Austin with Gun Plumber, and I'm saying, with Gun Plumber, you'll get it right the first time.